Hi everyone. Today we are going to talk about education debt. And my name is ShiQing, and your guys can call me Wendy.
I'm John.
I am Alice.
I'm Weiyao.
And my name's Evan. I'm Kaya.
Why is education debt important? Well, student debt is a major issue. Currently, there are 45 million Americans who have a combined student debt of $1.7 trillion. College costs have increased by 16% over the last 10 years, and nearly 70% of these students take out loans in order to finance their higher education. The reason why education is being so highly sought after is because college grads earn 80% more than students with just a high school diploma. The graph in the top right shows a gap between the median pay between a bachelor's degree graduate and a high school graduate. The gap is widened when education is further pursued and earnings continue to rise with a master's and a PhD. There's also not much forgiveness in the current student debt policy. Recently, Biden rejected an executive order to eliminate $50,000 in student debt for all students and instead opted for $10,000 as 50,000 would have been too much. In addition, student debt is getting worse. The pandemic did not help, as now student debt is projected to balloon over $2 trillion by 2022. The graph in the bottom right shows a steady increase in student debt, which does not show any signs of slowing down.
Our policy would tackle the rooming issue of students that is affecting so many Americans. First, our policy would allow students to borrow for both tuition and housing, which is different from many other countries. In addition, loans will not begin to start being paid off until they reach a yearly income of $44,000. Other countries have these bills that allow the law as a great burden, has their limit set as $29,000, and Australia has their as $35,000. The reason for this increase is because we feel that students are still not financially independent at these accounts, but by the time they reach $44,000 in yearly income, they can afford to start paying off their loans. From this point on, the percent of income paid towards this, and that is 4 to 8%. Depends on the income level. Meaning as people with more income will pay more. The threshold for having all adults forgiveness at 23 years after leaving college, which will be around 15 years old, or when they reach age of 64 years old. The policy debt forgiveness would relieve university graduates of the heavy finance debts and help enable them to establish themselves in highly competitive industries. What are its goals? The goals of this policy would be to the observed issues that plaguing so many Americans. Certain only 25% of graduating students will be able to pay off their loans. Leaving the other 75% of students who took out loans to pay for themselves on a unrelated installment plan. Helping these students out is important as education is what will help drive our country forward and to spark innovation. However, higher education opportunity right now are very limited and exclusive towards the family with higher incomes. The graph on the right shows that college participation rate directly correlates with income with family marking under $30,000 only having on range 15% college participation rate, and the family marking of $83,000 have nearly 85% college participation rate. Our policy would help encourage low-income students to pursue their goals of attending higher education without having to worry about future financing burden, and they would inherit with a certain debt forgiveness policy.
So, what problems does it try to solve? With having a good education debt forgiveness policy, it will not only make many Americans happier overall, but it will also allow them to focus on improving their lives and not on just repaying their loans. The current American loan system is very complex with many caveats. Having a more simpler loan system will not only incentivize students to take out more loans, but also have them pay off these loans over a more realistic time period. The government has attempted to tackle this problem. For example, Congress issued a one-time $350 million forgiveness fund in 2018 for students struggling to pay off their loans over a 10-year period. However, this is not enough involvement. The graph on the right shows what Americans are most in debt for, with student loans being second only behind mortgage costs. When comparing the United States' current debt forgiveness policy to the current policy implemented by the British, we can see some key differences. The US does not have an income threshold to begin paying off loans and expects monthly installments only 6 months after leaving college. We felt that this is not realistic enough, as these students are not yet financially stable. The British system is more income and age-based, with loans being paid off only when they begin making $29,000 in earnings or 30 years after graduating undergraduate schooling. If they still have loans by the age of 65, then all debt is forgiven. Our policy is similar to some of the key British components, such as the age threshold and the scaling based off income, but we have made some modifications. The first being an increase in the threshold to begin paying off loans. As mentioned earlier, we felt that graduates making $44,000 a year are in a more financially stable position. We also increased the age threshold to 67 years or 26 years after leaving college, as it would take longer for these students to reach this financially stable position and attaining that yearly salary, so we accommodated for that. When relating our policy to Keynesian ideas, we know that Keynes advocated for greater government involvement. Our policy would require heavy government involvement because the student debt crisis is spiraling out of control. As mentioned earlier, there have been instances where the government has gotten involved, but they often retract or don't put too much attention to the issue that is student debt. Based on data from the Federal Department of Education, it would take nearly $1.6 trillion to forgive all student debt instantaneously. Obviously, this is quite unrealistic, but it puts into perspective how important this issue is. Keynes would promote this heavy government spending as he believed in deficit spending, which would help the government to begin pay off this ridiculous amount of money. Next, Alice will go into detail about the advantages of our proposed policy.
John, for the amazing overview. So I'm going to continue with talking about arguments agree with the debt forgiveness program. Seeing the increasing education loan and economic and mental pressure students are facing for years, we are concerned about the health and economic power of our next generation. Forgiving debt by just a certain amount is not enough for students in the United States right now. A thorough policy that forgives student loans at a certain income level and age is the most logical way to relieve the pressure and increase our purchasing power. This will help boost the economy too. However, making the policy income-based and age-based ensures equality and fairness. So right now, taking a closer look at US policy. We see a really good start. So nearly $10 billion in student loan debt has been wiped away since President Biden took office, the most sweeping attempt to fix badly broken parts of the federal student loan system in at least a decade. The beneficiary includes permanently disabled people and those who are defrauded by failed for-profit schools and soldiers deployed to war zones. More than 500,000 borrowers had their loans erased this year. However, the majority of the borrowers are still trying to repay their debt under this long-term trap. Biden recently rejected an executive order to erase about $50 billion in student loans, claiming that the U.S. needs a long-term change. Simply erasing debt without a proper plan, the process is going to be really messy. Thus, seeing the need of erasing $50 billion debt and a plan that all borrowers can benefit from, we propose a policy that is based on income and retirement age. Okay, the beneficiary of debt forgiveness program claimed that finally having those loans gone, seeing a $0 balance, means the whole world to me. Yeah, we need a policy that is mature enough to help more students in debt. The UK student loan policy has been developed for decades. Our policy is a reform that adopted the UK's debt forgiveness policy to match the situation that our student borrowers are facing. We adjust the income level to be a little bit higher than the UK policy. Though repayment would not be as high as possible, we ensure that people have the ability to repay their debt, and they would not be too distressed from the repayment. Our income threshold is more reasonable. And moreover, by setting an age boundary at the retirement age, we reduce the pressure on the elders so that people do not need to struggle to repay their debt until the end of their lives.
Thank you, Alice. Let's see this data. Through this data, we can see student debt has more than doubled since 2006. The average of U.S. student debt is $1,123.78 billion. The minimum of U.S. student debt is $480.97 billion in 2006. The maximum of U.S. student debt is $1,732.22 billion in 2021. The amount of student debt in 2020 totally nearly 1.6 trillion, more than twice the amount outstanding in 2006. That growth in debt significantly exceeds the increase in the number of students, which the Department of Education estimate has only risen by 2% amount undergraduate and 12% at graduate level. For a country whose students are drawing in debt, Sanders is stepping up to solve an issue many are concerned with. Has the College of All Act to prove that at least 48 billion per year. This will drop all tuition and fees at four-year public college, university, turbo college, and community college. It will cancel the entering 1.6 trillion in outstanding student debt for 45 million borrowers, provided Pell Grant to low-income students to cover the non-tuition and fee cost of school. This including housing, booking, supplies, transportation, and other costs for living, require participating states to cover the full cost of obtaining a degree of low-income student. The similarity between our policy and College for All is we are canceling debt for students, but our policy will be ridding 44 million people for their student loan debt. It will possibly to bring wealth open up and help close the racial wealth gap. Our policy gives everyone opportunity to go back to school and complete a higher degree, being paying off loans need reaching a 44,000 yearly income. It is the average income of United States. The start is 26 years old after leaving college. The end age is 67 years old when you retire. Our policies are more flexible on time. Also, our policy would lighten the financial burden. Government doesn't need to pay off too much money. We believe that the money will be better spent on freeing millions for hardworking people for the burden of student debt. It will boost the economic by 1 trillion over the next 10 years and creating up to 1.5 million new jobs every year. Here is a UCLA example. We can see for a 4-year California resident UCLA student, when you graduate, we need to pay $145,188 for the non-resident UCLA student need to pay $264,204. So their life, the U.S. average income is $44,000. Compares to the income, we can see they need to pay many years. People are having a heavy student debt. Our policy gives students time to having a stable income. Also, you don't need to pay off when you are older than 67 years old. It gives students a better retired life. Okay, let's welcome Evan.
Thanks, Wendy. Those were some compelling arguments. However, I do not agree. Student loans used to be paid back on a 10-year plan. Today, some repayment plans are 20 or even 30 years long. In this graph, we can see that the largest percent of student debt is still held by those in their 20s and 30s, but older Americans are holding an increasingly large portion of student debt. In 2020, 22% of student debt, or $336 billion, was held by Americans over the age of 50. In 2004, that number was just 10%. The increasing cost of tuition has made it very hard to repay these student loans, such that some American student loans are old enough to have their own student loans. If this bill was enacted, we would expect to immediately forgive an estimated $200 billion and tens of billions of dollars each year following. The money to pay this bill will come from you, the generous taxpayer. However, according to the latest current population survey by the Census Bureau, in 2020, 37.5% of adults over 25 have a college degree. This leaves just under 2/3 of the population paying off student loans that they never took out. This isn't the first time we've tried student loan forgiveness. Under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, Teacher Loan Forgiveness Program, National Defense Student Loan Discharge Program, and Nurse Corps Loan Repayment Program, we've tried to tackle the student loan crisis. However, these student loan programs haven't made a dent in the issue. That's because these industry-specific programs don't tackle the roots of the problem. As Betsy Mayat said, to me, the free or debt-free college proposals hold more weight than loan forgiveness, as they address the illness itself rather than just the symptoms. She's correct, because even though these loan forgiveness programs do help people, they don't tackle the roots of the issue. That's because the elephant in the room isn't student loans, it's tuition prices. Student loan debt is an issue, and this debt forgiveness program will only exacerbate it further. Debt forgiveness will make the perceived cost of college cheaper, incentivizing more people to attend college. As demand for college increases, the demand curve will shift to the right, increasing the equilibrium price to match the new higher level of demand. As you can see, this program will increase tuition prices rather than solve the problem. This ultimate increase in tuition costs will fall on taxpayers to bail out the government for this fruitless bill.
Thank you, Evan. I have two main concerns about this policy. The first one is accumulating unpaid loans from previous generations pressure the government to raise interest rates on future student loans. For example, in the UK, before 1998, all public universities were free. However, in 1998, the government had to establish Plan 1, which required a minimum of £1,000 payment per year, which was raised to £3,000 in 2004, with an interest of Bank of England rate or the CPI, whichever is lower, plus 1%. However, these changes were not enough, and the government was forced to create a new plan in 2012 called Plan 2, which required minimum payment of £9,250 per year with an interest of RPI plus 3%. This isn't fair. The future generations shouldn't be subject to a higher interest just because the previous generations don't pay. When we look at the graph, we can see the jump in interest rates for Plan 2, and today Plan 2 interests 5 times higher than Plan 1. Also, interest with a longer repayment period will mostly harm the poor. Compare a teacher and a banker. It will take the teacher much longer to repay the debt compared to a banker, hence the teacher will be subject to more interest. So considering the rising interests as well as rising tuition costs, with time, this policy creates an unpayable debt bubble. Well, the next question is, are the degrees worth the same? A degree doesn't guarantee a high-paid job like it once did. And why is that? In 1963, LSE professor Lionel Robbins's report highlights the significance of maintaining the quality of higher education for the society. The UK government accepted his proposals. The case until early 1990s, until the establishment of polytechniques. Referring back to Evan, the rising demand for higher education puts pressure on politicians to meet the demand, which they turn into an opportunity. The politicians realize lowering university standards and getting more people educated with institutions such as polytechniques will help them get the higher education numbers they need for a political outcome they may pursue. Tony Blair, the longest serving British PM, served 3 terms, and in his second term, he said his famous quote, "So today I set a target of 50% of young adults into higher education in the next century." Well, when we look at how polytechniques impacted the grade inflation, we can see a spike in the A's after the establishment of polytechniques when we look at the graph. In addition, the better universities with higher standards were also forced to contribute to the grade inflation in order to allow its student body to compete against students with inflated grades. So going back to our policy, which leads to a rise in demand for higher education, it also leads to a drop in the quality of education. In other words, our policy fails to maintain education standards. Today, the thought of getting into student loans for a degree with good grades in order to land a high-paid job is not often the reality. When we combine the rising interest rates on student loans and diplomas that don't get you solid jobs, we're left with a whole lot of graduates unable to pay their loan. Well, you should vote yes for this policy because student loans accumulate as time goes on. Raising the loan at a reasonable time reduces pressure and increases purchasing power. You should vote no against this policy because student loans are a problem, but the issue stems from tuition prices, not student loans. This program will only exacerbate tuition prices further rather than solving the issue. Well, thank you for listening.